Yay! What is up, everyone? Welcome to Ginger Runner Live, episode 326. I'm excited about tonight's episode.
Me too.
We get to talk about a subject that I think we touch on in every episode, but not to the degree that we get to focus on it tonight. And that's public lands, public land awareness, acknowledgement of public lands. We get to actually sort of talk about the land that we run on all the time. And even specifically here in the Northwest region. So we're going to try to talk a bit about the public lands that we run on here just outside of the Seattle region, but we'll also try to take that conversation a bit more nationally, maybe even internationally, as our guest tonight, David Dunphy, is the president of the Issaquah Alps Trails Club, which is an organization here locally. And he's going to be talking to us a bit about public lands as we approach the National Public Lands Day on the 26th of September, or the 4th Saturday of September. This year it happens to fall on the 26th. So I'm excited about today's show because I think we're going to be educated in a way that we have been wanting to be educated on the land that we run on for a long time.
Yeah, it's also really important too.
Totally.
Yeah.
So welcome everyone to Ginger Runner Live, episode number 326. We're going to talk about the land that we run on. Sit back, relax. Here we go. Ginger Runner. Yay! What is up, everyone? Welcome to Ginger Runner Live, episode number 326. Thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your busy Mondays to spend a little bit of it with us. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. People are noticing my sweater. I do think it's officially sweater weather.
It is
fall
chilly here.
Tomorrow, I believe.
Is tomorrow the first day of fall?
I think it is. It is. Yeah.
You wouldn't know because it feels like it turned fall like 2 weeks ago while we had the smoke. The smoke came in and just turned everything to fall here in the Pacific Northwest. I'm excited about tonight's show because we get to talk with David Dunphy. David Dunphy is the president of the Issaquah Alps Trails Club, which is a local organization all about advocacy and empowerment, public lands, education, outreach. We're going to try to dig into a topic of conversation that I think we've probably touched on to some degree in every episode of Ginger Runner Live, but never really dug in and really acknowledged. And that's talking about the land that we run on, how we can help preserve it, how we can help keep it strong, and
why it's important to do that.
Also ask some questions just in regards to land acknowledgement and things like that, both locally and how our global national audience can sort of learn from this as well. So we're going to talk to David Dunphy here. We'll introduce him in just a second, but he is, again, the president of the IATC, which is very local for us. Mm-hmm. It is sort of an organization that deals with the trails that we run on every single day. And we hope that our viewers and listeners will sort of be able to find the organizations that help the land that they run on every single day. So we're going to talk with David on today's show. I'm very excited about it. Before we introduce our wonderful guest tonight, of course, it's not just myself. We've got Kim. Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
Hello.
Hi.
It's like sweater. We haven't been staring at each other for the last 6 months in this house.
Wait. You are my roommate. You live here too. Roommate, a.k.a. wife. It's been great getting to know you.
It's always awkward here, you guys. What's up? Kim Chima Newberry here, as always. If you're new, welcome. Hello. So I apologize for the weird intro. If you're new, welcome. We are live. David will be joining us in just a second. Because we are live, you can interact with our guests. So if you have questions for David, just pop them in the chat room.
And before we introduce our guests, we do like to acknowledge the individuals that help make this show possible. It is our Patreon crew. We like to refer to them as the GR crew. It is because of them that we're able to do this show every single week, that we're able to do the reviews of all the gear we do reviews for, all of our movies and films. It's because of our Patreon crew. One individual at that top tier, Brian Sands, has been just a longtime supporter, incredibly inspiring individual. We like to mention him at the top of every show just to thank him. And Brian Sands is currently on this incredible journey right now, training for the Cocodona 250-mile event, which is going to be in 2021. But, excuse me, Brian just had one of his biggest weekends of running ever.
Ooh, spoilers. I might be talking about that later.
You just spoiled it. You just spoiled what you say. I'm spoiling it. All right, I'll let you handle the details. Anyway, Brian did something really cool this weekend. So a shout out to Brian and the rest of the Patreon crew. And if you have not joined the Patreon crew, we'd love for you to join us over there. One cool thing that we also started this weekend is our Discord server, our very first Ginger Runner Discord server. And Patreon gets basically first access as we sort of experiment with the platform. It's been an amazing communication tool just in the last 24 hours in regards to conversations about gear, land, hydration packs, this episode, our Daily Brew episodes, all sorts of stuff.
We're learning.
Discord, huh? And so that will be open eventually to all viewers of every video and stuff on this platform. But until then, it's Patreon exclusive with its own little Patreon exclusive area. So if you're on Discord, get ready. You're going to want to join us over there for continued conversation. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guest tonight, David Dunphy, who again is the president of the Issaquah Alps Trails Club. David.
Yay!
How are you, my friend?
Excellent. Thanks for having me on tonight.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited about this show because we have mutual friends. We have mutual contacts. Caitlin Gerben, obviously, we've had her on the show a number of times. She's a fantastic trail runner. We'll just shout her out at the beginning of the show here, sort of making this introduction. But she kind of brought to our attention that, like, listen, there are organizations that deal with the land that you run on every single day. And I was like, I always take that for granted, sort of understanding, yes, we get to go to a park and we get to run on these trails in these parks or in the mountains and that sort of thing. So let's just start with sort of your role, what the IATC is, and how it relates to the trails that we run on here locally.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Caitlin's amazing. And she, like, that Mount Rainier thing she did this summer, like, incredible. Yeah, she's...
it was okay. It was all right.
Yeah, she puts us all to shame. So she's a member of our board. So the Issaquah Alps Trails Club is an advocacy group that focuses on Tiger, Squaw, and Cougar Mountain and a little bit of the Raging River. But maybe I'll start with just like, what is the Issaquah Alps, where it is? And I think that will connect us both to your land acknowledgement piece, which I think is so important of us recognizing that, and also like where the club has been. And I think that will just lead us into, I sit on the shoulders of giants who have made this place possible. So I'm just excited to get to tell you about them tonight.
Stoked.
Issaquah Alps, like, you have these mountain ranges. They're old mountain ranges that survived the last glaciation period. And as those glaciers receded out and put all this deposit that made kind of downtown Issaquah and left us Lake Sammamish, you had these peaks. And the Snoqualmie people have been traveling and living in these places since time immemorial. You see their relics and those pieces here, and they're still here today, and they're still huge partners in protecting the salmon and the wildlife and all the pieces that we love about the Alps. In the kind of the 1800s, you had this huge extraction industry as white settlers came to our region, and cougar, tiger, squaw had these huge coal mines. So not just the lumber that is kind of indicative of the Northwest, but coal extraction. Newcastle was like one of the second biggest cities as they were pulling coal out into Seattle, and that was one of the things that shaped Seattle as being kind of a hub on the West Coast, that it had coal and trees. 1900s was kind of like peak coal in the Issaquah Alps. That was like when the first car came over Snoqualmie Pass. And the region's just always been evolving and changing since. The club was started in the late 70s, which is kind of on the heels of this like environmental revolution. It's in the 60s, we got the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Wilderness Act. Like, we had this idea of like, we needed to change our relationship to public spaces. And the Issaquah Alps was a joke. Like the idea, it was kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing to call these little hills Alps, and Harvey Manu was kind of the thought leader of the club at that time. And he had this deep sense of understanding that we could have a wilderness within an urban area. And sometimes that's what we call the Alps, is this wilderness within. Like, he was instrumental in creation of the North Cascades and like what we call capital W wilderness, or wilderness that's designated by Congress. But he had this idea, and he was even talking about wilderness on the metro and some of these things like really early on. And those first couple of years of the club was all about just getting people out in these places. So things that we would not do today, they were blazing trails, they were writing these kind of hiking guidebooks, but they knew that just like your runners that get out on these public places, like if you don't get to go to these places, you don't develop that first connection, that first love of the place.
Right.
I spend a lot of time leading kids out in places, and there's always this point on longer trips when you start hearing people change from the public lands to our public lands, and that these are our places. These are our kind of inheritance of these places. So that was kind of the first couple of years of the club's history. In 1990, there was this huge march or protest, essentially, of people traveling from Snoqualmie Pass all the way to the shores of Seattle to kind of talk about this Mountains to Sound Greenway, and that we live in a phenomenal place with connected landscape, and that unless we did things right now to lay the foundation, we could lose it to an urban sprawl, and we could lose these places that is this identity of the Puget Sound region. So the club basically went broke to finance and sponsor that event, which became the Mountains to Sound Greenway, which is the area kind of through Ellensburg to Seattle that was actually last year recognized as a National Heritage Area, which will help all these lands kind of work together. But the club has always just been a group of passionate people, volunteers, that believed that getting people out there and then having a long vision for the landscape, that if we got people to work together, if we thought about this place creatively, we could enter more of these places into public lands. And if we had them as public lands, they were ours, and that we could continue to do the work of inviting more people out there and serving people in the environment in those spaces.
This is fascinating to me because in the last few years, I grew up here. I moved to Los Angeles for a period of my life, moved back, and have just felt this new connection to the lands that I grew up in and around. And so a part of that has been learning as much as I can about the history and trying to absorb as much as it is, because we do live in such a beautiful, iconic area. And you mentioned some of the like Harvey Manning and some of the history of just the region, and what I've been reading is just fascinating in regards to like Newcastle and these areas that were huge centers of industry on the West Coast. Like Newcastle, I believe, was one of the biggest cities on the West Coast for years because of mining. I could dive in so much into this and pick your brain so much. But what I do want to kind of touch on is you're mentioning the Issaquah Alps Trails Club as the sort of local organization that kind of advocates for this land. Do other organizations like yours exist around the country? Is this just specific to our region? Because we're going to have viewers and listeners that are probably hearing this going, wow, what a cool area. What a cool organization. Can people find some of those for their local lands?
Yeah, I don't doubt, like all over this country and all over the world, like when there's passionate people that invest in their backyard and help be the stewards of those places, those organizations exist. And they're always operating within this patchwork of federal agencies, cities, nonprofits, all trying to work together at different scales to influence things. And I think that's one of the things that makes me most proud about the Issaquah Alps, is that it's just a group of people that know that like Issaquah's trailhead city, and that these mountains are important to us, and that they just spent the time just always thinking about this place, and that if you act kind of really locally and always collaboratively, not trying to pick the fight, but speak the truth and get the right people in the room, like you can make amazing things happen. And I think that's what I think about with like mine and this kind of next generation that's taking on this club, is that, for the last 30 years, a lot of big lifting happened to have this patchwork of private and public lands kind of coalesce into the Alps. And don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of work to do to close loops and connect places. But what are we going to do with this now that we have an Alps? And that's really exciting to me.
Again, in my sort of history learning process in the last couple of years, it's been fascinating to see that in the last 30, 40 years, just how much work has been done by regular people to help make the Issaquah Alps what they are today. Harvey Manning and the whole board and IATC and everything like that. Just the book that I have on Cougar Mountain alone, which was written by Harvey Manning, has this great forward. It's like 60-page forward or something, kind of talking about every couple of years there'd be some new development attempting to come in and build, and individuals standing up in the local meeting saying, no, we want this land for everyone. We don't want it to be apartments or condos or homes. And it's just fascinating to sort of read about these fights that people would have for the land that we now have public. We can dive in here.
Building off of that for a second, like, and that work is just never done. Like,
right.
A couple of years ago, there was this big development on the slopes of Cougar Mountain right above the transit station, Bergsma, which you might have heard about in just living in Issaquah. And there's these 4 badass women that lived up there, and they were just not going to take it, and the club helped support them to just galvanize this group of people to talk to the county, to talk to the city, just to like build this thing of this is ours and here's our fight of this moment. And it was amazing because it was, just under 50 acres that they got entered into public lands, and that the city of Issaquah stepped up in a huge way that we haven't seen cities do to purchase that land. And that took amazing leadership by the city council and amazing leadership by the mayor and the county to support that. And it wouldn't have happened without citizens helping negotiate, finding the money, and encouraging these public leaders, like, be bold, we got you. And that's what like citizen activism is just helping see the big picture, connect the dots, and encouraging people to act bold.
It's been really cool to read this stuff, because as I'm reading it, I'm going, does this even happen anymore? Like, are people going to meetings and being angry about land being used for a certain way? Are they being listened to? And I love that it is a continuing conversation that is happening and is making a difference.
Yeah.
We have live questions, so I want to get to some of these as well. Of course, we have a live chat room. If you have a question for David about any of this subject, jump in. Kim will grab it. What you got?
Yeah, great question from Nathaniel. Nathaniel says, the bulk of the public lands are located in the Western United States. For those in other regions or outside of the U.S., why are public lands worth preserving?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I can't speak to what's all over the nation, but I know that, like, in my work, I spend a lot of time connecting kids outside. Tiger Mountain, is this little mountain right outside this urban area, and you watch the kids go out to that place for the first time, and like they see the wonder of Tiger Mountain like it's any of the grandeur of any of our national parks. And I think that we can create and save these places in urban areas and anywhere in the country where there's people willing to care about how do we help connect intact ecosystems and then invite people out there. I don't know if that answers this question, but like I think that there's the opportunity, and I think that's like one thing that's really cool about the Alps was that these were places that could have just disappeared on us. Like it was logged out. There was roads everywhere. There was garbage. There was misuse of this place. But with the leadership that was kind of at the early years of this club, it was seeing that if you start with the land, even at whatever condition it is, maybe you even have to accept that the land will be logged and then you can preserve it. Like if we're willing to hold on to it and take care of it, like we'll have old growth forest again.
That's actually a great question that sort of dovetails in 2 ways. One, talking about Tiger Mountain, and 2, in regards to logging.
Yeah. So Scott in the chat room, a local here, says, I see there's going to be some logging possibly done on West Tiger 3 and understand there may be a possibility of a land trade if this is allowed. Scott is asking, is there any truth to this?
Yeah, definitely. I can tell maybe a little bit of the history of Tiger Mountain, and then I know a little bit about that land trade, but like I'm happy to connect him to like the most up-to-date information. So Tiger Mountain, there was a national policy of this checkerboarding of our country. So certain square miles were given to different organizations to incentivize the railroad coming out here to pay for schools and those kinds of things, which led to this legacy of disconnected land. So Tiger Mountain is really a history of understanding that like we value a well-managed working forest. So the DNR and through different kind of community groups help trade away different properties so that could coalesce into a single management of that by our state organization. And part of Tiger Mountain, which West Tiger and High Point, those kinds of things, are managed in a way that like there won't be logging on there. It's not a working forest. But the other parts of Tiger are a working forest, so that the sale of that lumber helps pay for our public education. And the club, tries to take this moderate view of, like we don't want to be just no logging, because we think that you can have sustainable logging practices and that you can manage that well. And if you give the DNR the resources to do that, they're wonderful partners and they provide for amazing hiking trails. And we had Hillary Franz at our last kind of public forum last year, and she started talking about this idea of, how do we start valuing the public lands as carbon sinks? So like, yeah, we're logging public lands now, but maybe Tiger Mountain is going to be seen as this huge carbon resource, and that's going to keep the trees and the land moving forward. But it's like keeping it well managed and in public lands, like we're talking about, our lands to manage for ourselves, is like so awesome. Specifically to that question, though, on West Tiger, Weyerhaeuser does still own parts of the top of that mountain, especially where the radio towers are. So it's well within kind of their purview to log those pieces and following, the best practices of the industry. It doesn't look like, from the latest information I've heard, it doesn't look like they're going to move forward with that because of a lot of things, 2020. But that definitely could happen, but it's not the whole mountain, and you would still have access to hiking trails and those kinds of pieces if it did.
I am also super fascinated to kind of go. I want to kind of focus super wide on this question, because the more we start to dig into this, the more I'm kind of I begin to think of like, depending on the trails that people are running and depending on where they're running, whether that's in California, Colorado, East Coast, something like that, there's going to be some sort of designation to the land that they're running on. Is there a hierarchy of land designation? So like, does public lands, does that supersede or come over national park lands? Or like, how is the hierarchy concerned, and labeling and stuff like that? And how much should we pay attention to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like with the Mountain Society Greenway, or in our area, we have a patchwork of land managers. So that's everything from our city owns land and manages it. There's the Department of Natural Resources. So that's a state agency that owns land. As you move further up the mountains, you end up into federal land. So the Forest Service owns land. Going back down the valley, you have the state parks. So that's another state agency with a different mandate. So the DNR has a mandate to manage working forests. So they essentially are saying, hey, Washingtonians, we own this land for you to help you have recreation and make money off of it. And that's our purview. The state parks, hey, we own this land for you, your public lands, so that you can enjoy and recreate on it. To the county that also has amazing resources in that way. So that's like, who are the players, and they all have different missions. So like understanding the mission, I think, is important. But then also in how the land is managed, each of those land agencies will think about it a different way. So maybe they are focused on human-powered recreation. Maybe they're focused on like, I have a legal obligation to make money for the taxpayer by holding this land. Or we talked about capital W wilderness. Maybe Congress has acted in a way that said that this land is going to be set aside, where man is not, the primary shaper of this landscape, and that it will be just set aside for forever. So yeah, I think it's a kind of a range of things. I think I'll leave it there. Yeah.
No, I mean,
No, this is so great.
That's so great, because I think what that brings up is, you say patchwork and you say myriad, And I think that's exactly, so we host a race on Tiger Mountain. Full disclosure, this is a conversation that we were hoping to have with you anyways, just in regards to like, when we bring runners to a place that of course doesn't belong to us, but we want to share the glory of it and the history of it and the acknowledgement of the tribes that use this land. Before we use it, we also want to know who is managing it and how can we best operate with them. And
we learned a lot in trying to, like, in the permitting process of our race. It was like, oh, okay, so it's not just the city of Issaquah, and it's not just the DNR. There's this other thing also that's there that we just weren't really aware of, and that also pieced together the picture of, so there are private lands within these big areas that we had considered maybe just all DNR land.
Yeah. As trail runners, you go out there, you experience these trails and just like, man, this is incredible. Like this is my favorite route, or this is now my favorite place to run. And so Tiger was that for us. And then we became the race directors and we're like, well, we want to host a race here because we want to share this beautiful place. It has all this history with trail running and everything. And then you start to learn like the management agencies, who's in charge of what, where that designation ends, where the lines are. And I think it opened our eyes a lot more to just how important it is to preserve what we have and manage it correctly. And I think this is great. So for our trail running audience, David, is there like a best practices or a way that they can look up the lands that they're running on? Or is there like a resource library or something, a map or anything like that where they can go, great, I now know this land is managed by X or Y?
Yeah, I can't really think of a single place, and that's like a challenge of like, oh yeah, you could definitely look up, what the land manager is. It's part about just being an informed recreationalist as you're like doing those resources, and like what a powerful moment just to get informed by how this place is. Like how amazing would it be that every time somebody ran the Tiger Mountain Trail that they thought about the Snoqualmie people who had always been there and are still there. They thought about that logging history that's on that place. They thought about the fact that trail was built by volunteers, like even high school students that like built that thing, and that I think to that idea of like, yeah, there are these public lands, which like reinforces like as responsible recreationalists, we need people that have the vision of the landscape, the vision of the watershed, the vision of what this could be. Because 30 years ago, when they were thinking about this place, like you couldn't see it, but they were envisioning like you are going to have this wilderness within this public landscape that you can continue to recreate on. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing I hope tonight is that we just invite the trail running community to join the vision of the next 30 years. Like how can we think about, continuing to close the gaps? How do we think about creating a recreation landscape that works for runners, for hikers, for bikers, for other users? How do we think about the Alps? Like last week when our valleys were full of smoke, like what does it mean to have a climate resistance Alps? Like what do we need to do for helping inform our land management to take care of this, but then how do we value this thing as a tool against that? I think, those are all really exciting things.
I'm like pumped for this show because I hope everyone hears it and listens to it and sort of gets in more with the land that they're running on or biking on or hiking on and learning more about it.
It's really easy just to put on your shoes and your gear and just go.
Forget about everything else.
And you're running, you see the boundary signs and you're just running through them, or you're not really piecing together, okay, well, this is this and this is that. And what can I do to help and why is it important? So,
and how fortunate we are to have, just again, kind of thinking back to just this specific region, this hyper-localized Issaquah Alps area, how lucky we are that in the last 40 years, there have been people fighting for it to keep it public and that sort of thing. Yeah. Great question in the chat room that again sort of connects with what you were just saying, David.
Yeah, a question from Chaos Ruler of All says, question for David. With taking care of the land, are you talking to the First Nations elders to help care for that land?
Yeah, I think that like in everywhere you have to like address how the tribes like in those areas want to be addressed and think about like those landscape. Like we're fortunate in the Puget Sound that with the Mountains of Sound Greenways leadership and the different public land agencies, that there's an awareness that that's, something that we're always like working on and inviting and like thinking about, like, how do we take care of these places? And I think that like in every place it's different, and like recognize the sovereignty of each of those tribes, and that they want to think about and use their land differently.
That's great. I also want to talk a bit about challenges, because I just knowing the history of the IATC and the region, what are some of the biggest challenges that you as a club face, as an organization face, and that might be what other organizations face to some of our viewers more locally to them? What are the biggest challenges that you guys have to overcome?
Yeah, I think right now the club is spending a lot of time thinking about, how do we act in a different world that's changing around us, that's, faster paced and more professional. Like in the 70s, they were like doing these things with like talking to the Seattle Times, and there wasn't even email when they were doing some of these organizings. And like we live in a fast paced world. So I think that developing new tools of communication and organizing, our generation might not have some of these like heroes that are willing to go to every single public land meeting and every single thing and know everybody on the city council. But we do have tools, like you talked about Discord as this new way of communicating. We have tools to organize more people to accomplish the same task. And I think that's one thing that the Trails Club, and maybe someone listening tonight is going to be like, I'm going to go help that organization. And I would say, yeah, we're open to your brain trust to help us. Like, how do we think about doing this work differently, and using 21st century tools to do conservation?
I love that. And it's, I think, really important to kind of know what these challenges are that you guys are facing on a regular basis, or even on a long-term basis, because I guess that's the other thing that's difficult, is to realize that these aren't, let's look at the next year, let's look at the next 2 years, let's look at the next 5, 15, 30 years. We want that land to be there. We want it to continue to grow, get better. And we know that there's going to be more people accessing it, or at least trying to. And it's an interesting part of the conversation. Again, we do have live questions. I love this. Kim, what do we got? We got one from a very famous local here.
Is it me?
It's you.
Okay.
It's the sweater as well.
Yes. Okay. So that was a question from Caitlin, I think, that you were referencing. And Caitlin asked, can you give any advice for people to translate their love of the outdoors into advocacy for land and climate? Where should people start? How to get involved in their own local regions?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I think Caitlin's the best example of that, just asking, like, how can I help? And I think that the one thing that I'm humbled by this organization too is that, we're not experts in this, and that we let the passion carry us through our learning curves and all of this. I think about, Ken Konsmark was instrumental in our club. He was a Boeing executive that was loaned to the Greenway and like taught himself conservation. But his story was that he was on one of the Alps and came across somebody like dirt biking, and he stopped them and realized that he couldn't stop them alone. So he like taught himself these things. Another person in our area, like David Kapler, like he's an amazing mentor. He's a guy that goes to every single meeting, like knows who to talk to, and just really humble about connecting people and connecting pieces, and like always just like working towards it. He was a middle school teacher that just was like passionate about these things and willing to dedicate his life to just rolling up the sleeves and doing it. So I guess I would encourage anybody, like, the special skill that you have to have is the willingness to show up and learn. And I think that your passion will help you through the rest.
I think it's another sort of great connection to learning about the lands that you're running on as well. Like, if there's a first step, and if it's you looking at a map and going, wait, what is this land? Whose land is it? Where is it managed? That sort of thing. That's a great first step. And like, I don't know, I'm getting pumped, David. This is the weirdest thing to say. Like, I'm getting pumped about land, but just advocacy and sort of being more aware of the land that we're using on a regular basis and how we can get involved with IATC specifically, just since it's hyper local to us. This is exciting stuff. Let's get to some more of these live questions.
Yeah, a question from VSage, and they asked, David, on a personal level, are you a runner, hiker? What are some of the adventures you have been on?
That's a wonderful question. I'm not a runner. Maybe not yet. There's a growth mindset there. I only run when I'm getting chased, I guess. I grew up in Issaquah and was like taken outside, like hiking and backpacking. Really enjoy rock climbing. My other big volunteering is search and rescue. So that's like my other hobby outside. And then I'm lucky enough, I work for a small organization called the Youth Experiential Training Institute, which is a program that just help get kids outside and kind of utilize volunteers to do that.
My brain automatically went to the letters of what the Yeti Youth Experiential Training. I like that. It's very easy to remember. One more last question there.
Yeah, a question from Nathaniel. Nathaniel says, David, in many states, public lands protections are intertwined with endangered species that call those habitats home. Have the legislative changes to the ESA impacted your region? And if so, how?
Yeah, that's a great kind of piece is like that, well, first, like backing up to everybody's on, like the Endangered Species Act is like one of the most amazing pieces of legislation because unlike almost every other piece of legislation, it acknowledges the rights of not humans, but animals and plants to exist. So it's like our government like empowering the rights of those other living things, which is so amazing if you just think about the legislation at piece. But in our area, like it's a story about fish, right? So the Issaquah Alps is the uplands watershed, the filtering of an intact ecosystem and the springs that feed both the kokanee salmon, which is our local endangered species in Lake Sammamish, but as well as the other salmon across our region. So one of the projects that we're working on right now, State Route 18 so that's on the backside of Tiger. It's a 2-lane highway that's super dangerous, and the state and through some of the leadership of our representatives are going to go and start investing and thinking about how are we going to improve and widen this place. So that's an example of like, how can we do win-win? So we know that they have to address the salmon passage in those places because of how they built before doesn't allow that. But how can we be even bolder to allow animal undercrossing so that the Issaquah Alps isn't this siloed ecosystem that we've worked so hard to connect and intact, but how can it be connected into the Cedar watershed and then into the Cascades? So like just thinking kind of big in that scale, but he's totally right. The endangered species gives you the mandate for specific action.
How many different projects are you guys working on simultaneously? Because I can imagine these are long-term projects and these discussions have to go through all sorts of boards and in front of different people. And how many do you have to deal with on a regular basis? Like right now, are you dealing with 20 different issues at hand?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because it's a lot of like volunteers. David Kapler, that guy I mentioned earlier, like he has this running list that sometimes we joke it's called Harvey's List, who is like the founder of the club. But it's just kind of all these issues that you're kind of like working on. And then sometimes they get hot, like, the housing development or something else happens where there's political will to make something happen or like a pressing threat to like, oh, we got to put more energy on that. Like off the top of my head, like, so State Route 18 is like something we're spending a lot of energy on. The High Point, they just finished acquiring one of the last pieces of property there. So like thinking about that as the gateway into the Greenway and like inviting people into the space. Save Coal Creek, there's a housing development right there across the street from that trailhead where there's an opportunity to think about that as connected landscape down to Lake Washington that they experienced in the 90s, or it could become houses. DeLeo Wall, same thing, is this beautiful piece of property that's scheduled to be logged, or like they're working on the logging permits, which is well within the right of that pub or private land, but that was just because we took for granted that, oh my gosh, there's private land still here. So like people working on those pieces. So yeah, I could go on and on, but there's always these working things. There's some big projects that are taking time, and then it's just like always keeping your ear to the ground. And the more people we have that are investing in time and listening to these conversations, it helps us know what's happening and to encourage other people to volunteer their time to keep track.
Using the Issaquah Alps Trails Club as an example, because I imagine groups and clubs like this exist around the country to sort of advocate for land. Is there a time or a place that people can come and help, or a place where we can contact the Issaquah Alps Trails Club and get in touch, come attend some of these meetings, try to offer support? How can we get in touch with organizations much like yours?
Yeah, COVID has always thrown a curveball here. So like the club, in normal times are hosting hikes all the time, or we host an annual public forum where we invite the land managers to celebrate their successes and kind of have conversations around challenges that we can work together. So I think we're working on trying to put that online this year. So I'd encourage anybody to join that conversation, because I think that it's in those moments where you're hearing about the challenges of the land managers or hearing other volunteers talking about what they're working on, you'll be like, oh my gosh, like I love that place. Like maybe it's the Tiger Mountain Trail, or maybe it's, oh, I go to Coal Creek all the time. Like I can't imagine housing on the other side of that like will inspire somebody. We have a website that people can check out. And we're always looking for volunteers, regardless of your, maybe you can help publish information, or maybe you want to be a hike leader, or maybe like with the running community, you all travel the trail network more so than a hiker does in a regular day. Like you have eyes on that. Like maybe your passion will be like explaining what's happening and communicating that back to the land managers, so that they don't spend resource scouting, but maybe you ran out there and mapped every log that was across the trail so that they can use that resource of trail maintenance more wisely. I mean, the possibilities is endless. It's just whether you're willing to take that first step.
That's really funny, because I think we have more conversations about that than anything else on our trail runs, of like just looking at what trees are down, making that mental note of exactly where it is, almost to the foot of like, okay, it was 3 feet past the junction of Coal Creek, and we just ran through or ran up to the construction on Clay Pit with Coal Creek.
New tree down yesterday on Cougar.
New tree down yesterday. So it's funny that these are small mental notes that we make, and we talk about it on our runs, and we see and stuff like that, but there's actual usage of this information. And I guess we kind of take that for granted, of like, there are people who would like to know this, that there are 16 trees down on this one trail. Maybe one last question from the chat room, and then we'll move into the after show with David.
Sure. Question from Kristen. Kristen says, David, can you share a specific recent incident where multiple organizations and or tribes had different goals or priorities and had to come together to solve? She also goes on to say, you do not have to name specific tribes or organizations.
I mean, I guess going back to that Highway 18 is an example of it's going to take everybody to solve that problem. So, the Washington State, everybody has their own interest that they're trying to advocate for, and that it's like us merging those interests and finding the best possible solution. So the State Department of Transportation is our state agency. They have a mandate to be really efficient with our public funds and make the roads safer. The tribes are instrumental in talking about salmon habitat, and that when we go back in here, they have to take care of that piece. The cities both have the values of providing awesome transportation to their residents, but also kind of envisioning what is the infrastructure for a recreation economy and what do we need to do there. The Trails Club, is interested in connecting the Issaquah Alps to the greater ecosystem, but then also ensuring that there's infrastructure for good recreation. So like for Highway 18, that's like, we need an interchange at Tiger Summit if we're going to access Taylor Mountain on the other side and just be safe moving in that space. So in any issue, there's stakeholders that have kind of their interest. And I think that the real lesson that I keep learning again and again is that if you listen really well, and that you find that common ground and speak boldly for the vision of it, that we just keep working our way towards that thing.
What is the best way to build the strength of IATC? Are you 501c3 certified? Is it donations? Is it being a voice, being a part of the IATC and showing up at meetings? What's the best way to strengthen you guys, this club?
Yeah, we're in the middle of our kind of fund drive right now. So like, if it's financial resources that people have, that's wonderful. If it's volunteer time, that's wonderful. Even just being champions of these public lands when you're out recreating. I think that all those pieces are so important. Like, we know that we need to welcome communities that traditionally don't have access to these things, like just like they were doing in the 70s, that you can't love these things unless you go there. Like, that's a challenge of all public lands everywhere. How do we encourage everybody to feel like they are belonging and that these are their places? So yeah, I'd say if you're interested at all, there's a place for you in public lands to make these places better for everybody.
I absolutely love talking to you, David, and I feel like I could easily nerd out with you just in regards to like history and sort of talking about how things came to be and in the last 40 years. Not just nerd out, but also like pick your brain, because I can only imagine. I'm skimming the surface when it comes to some of the stuff that's occurred here locally to help make the Issaquah Alps what they are. I can only imagine there's stories that have been passed down from other members of the board and stuff like that over the years. So it's just great to have you on and to recognize that there's great work happening here locally to keep these lands public and keep them good and available to all of us recreators out there. Can you just let people know where they can go to support IATC, find out more information and your cause?
Yeah, IsaquahAlps.org is our website, and they can check us out there or find us on Facebook or Instagram. Caitlin's always making awesome posts on Instagram with these kinds of things. Yeah, and just thank you for the time tonight. Like, it's so awesome just to watch. More people in the trail running community is going to be part of the conservation story moving forward. And I think that it's just growing up, just like mountain bikes were growing up, a decade ago, that they are instrumental in some of the conservation work now. And I think that the trail running community is going to be the same thing. And we're just like so looking forward to their voice and their help in the next 30 years and beyond for the Issaquah Alps and everywhere.
That's, I think, part of what I'm so excited about even tonight is just getting a chance to talk with you and sort of learning more about IATC specifically. But because the lands mean so much to us just personally, and you've phrased it very well in the sense that you want people to go to these lands and go, these aren't just the lands, these are like our lands and we want to take care of them. We really have felt that connection. And it's great to talk to a club and an agency that wants to keep them exactly the way they are and continue to grow and build them and advocate for them. So thank you, David.
And I encourage everyone, regardless of where you are, to kind of dig into your own community and see, to find a similar organization to this in your local region. They exist. I'm sure they need donations and they need support and they need volunteers everywhere.
Yeah. Across the nation, across the globe. I'm sure organizations like the Issaquah Alps Trails Club exist near you. And as Kim mentioned, dig in, see what you can find, because the trails that you are out there enjoying, let's keep them. Let's make sure people can share them and love them and enjoy them for years and years and decades to come. What a great show tonight. We really appreciate our guest, David, for joining us to talk a little bit about land advocacy, public land, stuff like that. So we are going to move into our after show, though. In our after show, we'll maybe dig into a little bit more history. Just
I can tell I can see it in your face.
Because I'm like, that's a whole different show to like dig into like the history of this region.
And I have some amazing people you could bring on that, like, oh my gosh, the stories they tell, it's phenomenal.
So maybe that's something that we will do at another point. Because I know I want to get like super nerdy on it. So maybe in our after show here with David, we'll touch a little bit on some of that stuff and just kind of in regards to the history of our region. But before we do, and before we wrap up our main show here, we do like to recognize members of the community who go above and beyond, who are taking on their own challenges and absolutely crushing them. We are calling this segment, the GR Crew Member of the Week, where we get to recognize one of you out there for going above and beyond. Kim, who is this week's GR Crew Member?
Can you guess who it is?
Yes, because I spoiled it, apparently.
So this week's GR Crew Member of the Week, we talk about Brian often. We love Brian. He's a very important part of our community. Brian Sands, of course, is our GR Crew Member of the Week. I want to choose Brian because he did something pretty incredible this weekend. He did his biggest back-to-back weekend that he's ever done. He did 44 miles over the weekend, which is incredible. Yeah. It's huge. So Brian, congratulations. You are nailing your training during some interesting times that we're living through right now. So congratulations, Brian. Keep plugging away. We are super excited to see you crush all your upcoming goals.
Congratulations, Brian. And thank you so much, crew, for turning into. Yeah.
You got this.
Thank you for tuning into tonight's show. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Again, we are going to move into our after show with David. If you would like to join us for our after shows, all of them, past, present, future, head on over to patreon.com/thegingerrunner. For as little as $1 a month, you basically get connection to all of the after shows, our guests, and all that good stuff. We also do a daily live stream where every day we sit down for an hour and we just talk about running gear, training questions, or what did we just talk about this weekend? Podcasts. That's right. We talked about a Reply All episode.
Sometimes we talk about candy in Canada that I get sent from my parents.
And sometimes we talk about spiders.
Yeah.
So if you want to join our daily live stream, it's called The Daily Brew, where we chat over a cup of coffee or a beer. You can do so by going to patreon.com/thegingerrunner for $3 per month. That's it. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone, to tonight's Ginger Runner Live, episode 326 with David Dunphy from the IATC. We'll see you guys in the after show, or we'll see you next week for more fun. Get out there, train hard, virtually race harder, and party the hardest. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.